There we go. All right, so that's working. OBS Studio is now up. I'm recording, and all I need to do is get PowerPoint to talk to me. There we go. Okay, good. All right. Good morning. Anybody do anything on Project 2? Because wasn't it due today? Right. Okay. A formative was due today. The actual project is due in 2 weeks. It's more or less. Cool. Anybody talk to their AI at all over the last 5 days? Are you talking to it the same as you did before, or are you trying some of the things that I've been talking about in class?
I tried to do things, but it wasn't related to computer science, so I don't really have good data.
That doesn't make any difference. I didn't ask if it was related to the class. It doesn't have to be related to the class. Learning how to use generative AI more effectively is going to make you more capable. It can make you more capable. I'm putting together a lecture actually that I'll just talk about generative AI. I've already put one of the resources on Canvas, which is this book by a guy from Google, and it's pretty comprehensive. It actually is a pretty good description of working with generative AI, and it's 420 pages, and it's freely available, so it's hard to go wrong with that. But you'll be able to buy a copy of it from Amazon, printed December 25th of this year. So not only is it a pretty good reference, it's actually very current, because it will probably be out of date by June 25th, 2026. I don't know, do any of you actually work with these tools professionally or outside the use of this class? Because I can tell you that one of the things that's definitely happening is the world just keeps changing. Yesterday, OpenAI revealed a whole bunch of new tools that are specifically geared for people who don't program, so that you can now use tools inside of ChatGPT. And that's just a trend that's going to continue. So before you know it, your mother is going to ask you how to do something with ChatGPT, and you're going to be like, what? So you can't let mom down or dad down or your uncle or whatever. You can't let them down. You gotta be able to have the answers. Oh yeah, I know all about this. I've been working with it. Don't trust them. Your parents, your uncle, or ChatGPT. Logistics slide. Right, so I'll have office hours tomorrow at 2. I'll do noon to 1 next week on Wednesday, since Monday's a holiday. And I usually do them on Mondays and Wednesdays. But Monday's a holiday, but we have class on Tuesday and Thursday, so it doesn't affect us in terms of the class session. The biweekly check-in is open, and that's due on Thursday morning. Those have been really useful for me. I don't know if you find them useful. It's hopefully not a high-intensity activity. It's not intended to be, but it helps me understand what is working and what's not working. And it's especially important when I'm building this class as we run. So that's why I try to turn that around and have feedback and make sure that you know that this isn't performative. I'm actually using that to try and steer the direction of the class. I think those are the TA office hours. Armin actually has his posted on Discord, so it will tell you if you subscribe to it. It'll tell you when he's supposed to be available. I should do the same thing, but I haven't done that yet. And Jasper actually has his on Zoom. There's a link in the slides. The slides are on Canvas. So I decided to start today a little bit differently because I want to talk about Claude. told you a little bit about Claude. Anybody go look for Claude? No. Do you remember what I said about Claude? If you don't, then I'll skip the studio for now and we'll come back to it. How's that? And I got sick of PowerPoint, so I'm actually going to now switch to Opera, because everyone should be using Opera. Okay. Are we just going to ignore me? Oh, there. Okay, good. So, I've been talking about this concept of the empty chair, which is in fact a fairly standard way of looking at the ethical concerns and considerations of people who are affected by but not present for what you're doing. Since none of you remember who Claude was our, let's see, I think, Claude was our 28-year-old software developer who decided to save some money by getting a free VPN. We talked about residential proxies. Now, proxies, I didn't go into great detail about proxies. I gave you examples of different kinds of proxies, but proxying is one of the most common things we do in cloud computing. I mentioned load balancers. I didn't even talk about the fact that if you're trying to build a webhook, so for example, you want to monitor something from Google, you want to see Google activity, what you actually have to do is give it an IP address that it then sends messages back to. And so there are services that will connect through a proxy to get those messages so you can get them back to your local computer. In my own research, I had to do this. In order for me to monitor what was going on in my own Google Drive or my own OneDrive account, I actually had to build these little webhooks that would get called back and say, hey, something changed, something happened, you got an email, those kinds of things. And that's sent through a proxy service. Because something on the internet is actually grabbing that message, you connect to that thing, and you can retrieve the messages from it. It's a hole through your firewall, but it's a very small hole, so it minimizes the potential security risks. How many of you use the internet? How many of you have ever experienced a fraudulent website or a virus or crypto miner in your browser? There you go. Crypto miner, right? Who knows what, whatever it was. I mean, these are just other examples of monetization. Residential proxies are a very interesting case because they represent a hidden use of a service. You think, oh, I'm getting a VPN. And what's kind of scary is that when you start actually looking for information about how free VPNs work, or even non-free VPNs, that's the scariest part, you begin to learn that they're selling you something. What are they selling you? Silence, right? What are they selling? Does anybody in here use a VPN? Okay. You can actually VPN into UBC. So like when I'm traveling and I want to actually watch streaming services from Canada, I'll VPN into UBC and I can watch my streaming service. That's a geolocation hack. That's one of the reasons that people use VPNs. But in fact, the number one reason, does anybody here watch YouTube videos? How many YouTube videos have you seen where they're hawking a VPN? Yeah, I see some heads going, okay, yeah, they're probably the most common ads you actually see. What does that tell you? This is the critical thinking part of the class. What can I infer from the fact that the advertisers are paying real money to stick these endorsements into videos? We're not even talking about YouTube ads. We're talking about in-content ads. What does it tell you? Why are those people doing that? Because they think that this is the greatest product on the face of the planet? I can be stubborn too and stand here and wait.
They're obviously making money off of these.
Bingo! Anytime you see something that's heavily advertised, you have to sit there and say, how much of the money that they're collecting for the product is going into advertising? And the more you see the product that way, the more you realize a lot. I mentioned last week, I think it was last week, week before last, we were talking about what the typical margins are in software as a service. And it's like 60 to 80% is typical. And I realized you might not actually have anything to compare that to. When you buy a consumer product, the typical rule of thumb is that the cost to buy the product itself, the raw product from the original manufacturer, is roughly 1/6 of the cost of the end product. So where is the rest of the money going? In physical delivery, a lot of the money actually goes for the transportation of that product to you. Anybody ever order from a company called Amazon? Ever had a problem with your order? Ever tried to return something and have them say, just keep it? Why do they do that? Does anybody know what happens when you return something to Amazon? It gets thrown into a pile. And it literally is carted off by someone who takes that, repackages it, and often sells it in groups, in boxes. You can buy Amazon mystery boxes, for example, that are return items. If you return a piece of clothing, the clothing manufacturer's not going, the clothing itself is not worth the cost associated with reprocessing it for sale in almost all cases. Electronics are actually different. If you send that new 8 terabyte SSD NVMe device back to Amazon because, I don't know, you don't like the color, then they will actually repackage it. But that's because it's a high value product. So, residential proxies used for VPNs, and these VPNs are highly profitable. The free ones in particular are highly profitable. It's cheap to set them up, like trivially cheap. I mean, if you want to set up your own personal VPN, you can go and get a Linode instance for $5 a month, and you can have your own personal, completely controlled VPN for $5 a month. Now, it'll be a data center VPN, but you probably don't really care because you're not trying to do the kinds of web scraping that the companies who are paying for proxy side of this are paying for. So the point of bringing up Claude was to try and help you understand that sometimes these technologies that we don't really think about have real costs. So Claude Wang, and the name is in fact completely synthesized. Claude being the name of Claude, the AI, and Wang being the most common surname in the world. I asked Perplexity for that one. So if it's wrong, it doesn't really matter. The point was, it's not a real person. And one of the reasons I ended up doing this is because I looked for cases of people who actually had to go through the entire legal process to be exonerated, and you can't find them. Do you know why? Do you know what happens to the records of people who are accused of distributing CSAM? They're sealed. Do you know why they're sealed? I don't know. Well, I'll explain it to you. So, our mythical Claude Wang is a Vancouver-based software development who's a tech-savvy professional, and he has a security clearance working on something. I don't know what. Maybe he's working for CSIS. He decides to save some money because he's just a new grad, just got out of university fairly recently. So he's trying to save money because Vancouver's really expensive. and he downloads a free VPN. He just wants to access some region locked content from his device. Perfectly reasonable. Nothing unusual about that. And he, like probably almost all of you in here, didn't bother to read the terms of service. How many of you had read terms of service before I made you do it last week? When you read those terms of service, were you surprised at anything you saw in them, or did you think, this is easy? Of course I would have agreed to this if I'd read it. What are the problems with those terms of service? You have no negotiating power there, right? You either accept it or you don't use the product. So you go out and you spend $2,000 on a brand new iPhone 27X Max Pro. That's a mythical name, by the way. The $2,000 price tag's really not mythical, though. And the first thing it does is it insists you have to agree on this binding legal agreement that says that basically they can do whatever they want with whatever you give them. And what are you going to do? Say no? You actually can. You actually can take that back to Apple, and they will give you your money back. But now, Claude's IP address is being used by third parties to, do region skipping, and to do web scraping for price matching, and to run cryptocurrency schemes, and to run pig slaughtering operations, which we'll talk about next week. Anybody know what a pig slaughtering operation is? Ever heard the term? I'm not talking about physical pigs here. These are online scammers. The pig is, in fact, the human that they are going to convince to give them something of value. Ever received a text from someone you've never, a number you've never heard from, and they're like, let's say something innocuous, like, do you want to have lunch on Tuesday? I get them all the time. Those are fronts for pig slaughtering activities. So, Claude's IP address is used to distribute CSAM. See, downloading it is a little dodgy, but they tend to look for people who are distributing it. So it's the sending it back out. I found a really nice Stats Canada report, and I used that as the basis of the numbers I'm going to talk about. So this isn't just made-up data. This is a made-up individual, but that's because basically the court records of almost everyone who is exonerated are sealed because of the impact it has on their life. So let's look at this from the empty chair perspective. From the company's perspective, the VPN company, we need to monetize our free users, so selling their idle bandwidth is passive income. The users agree to the terms of service, so whatever we use it for is technically legal. We haven't done anything wrong. We told them what we were going to do. We did it. You read the whole end user license agreement. Did you see anything in there that said that they might actually use your endpoint to distribute illegal content? I didn't. Maybe we should feed it to one of our LLMs and ask it if it sees it. It's not there. Not explicitly there. It's implicit. But Claude didn't know about how it was going to be used, didn't really think about it. He didn't really realize the impact that it could have on his life. You're building applications. You're using the cloud to build things. And sometimes the things you build, not always, not everything you build is going to have this kind of potential impact. But you have to think about it, otherwise it will have that kind of potential impact. So, in the early morning hours, because the police like to do these things in the early morning hours for whatever reason, I think maybe they like drink too much coffee overnight and decide that that's the time to come get you. Honestly, the reason they do it is because people are usually asleep at that point in time, and therefore they're most docile and easiest to apprehend. They have a warrant for Claude's arrest. They seize all of his devices, including his work laptop. They will take those devices and they will undergo forensic analysis to determine if CSAM material is actually on the device. How many of you have an electronic device? How many of you don't have an electronic device? One person almost raised his hand, and then I think he was just like late on the previous answer. Right. How would you feel if your phone and your laptop and any other computer you had, even your gaming system, you've got a console game for whatever reason, you know, they take your Switch. It's a computer. How would that affect your life? So they take Claude. They arrest him. They do this in his apartment building where he lives. Some of the neighbors are awakened because, of course, there are police there at 4 in the morning. And the police have no compunctions about telling them why you've been arrested, why Claude has been arrested. So Claude's neighbors are told why Claude has been arrested. And then he's taken down to the police station, and he is booked into custody because this is a very serious crime. And now he has to find legal counsel. He's not poor. He's a software developer. He's making money. So he's not poor. So he's not going to be eligible for public defense. He's going to actually have to hire an attorney. Do you know that most criminal defense attorneys will not handle CSAM cases? There's only a handful of people who will actually defend someone like Claude, and they will probably want an initial retainer of anywhere from $20,000 to $100,000, depending on the case. How many of you have $100,000 sitting in your available slush fund? That's not for bond. I mean, that's not to get you out. That's to get legal counsel to tell you to shut your mouth and don't say anything. Because that's what every lawyer in this situation will do. But here's the interesting thing. This is from the Stats Canada report. I have a copy of it. I don't think I put it on Canvas, but I can if you want it. It's really kind of scary because this is a report from 2014 to 2021 where what they said was that 92% of all police-reported OCSE incidents, basically child porn, did not result in a completed court case. Many of them don't even involve an arrest, but of those that involve an arrest, it turns out a surprisingly large number of them hadn't made it to trial by 2023. So this isn't a problem that goes away when they look at your device and they say, oh, there's no porn on here. We're just going to kick you free. Okay, so Claude gets a legal counsel, he gets out of jail. He's missed work. But maybe he's working from home, okay, so they didn't notice it. But he has to actually call the company, and he can't call them on his phone because he doesn't have it anymore. So he has to borrow it from somebody else. He has to contact his company, and he has to tell them that his company laptop is in the police custody. What do you think is going to happen to Claude's job? I mean, suppose you're Claude's boss, and he calls you with this story. What are you going to ask him? Why do the police have your laptop? How long do you think it'll be before you actually get your devices back? How long are you going to go without a phone? Well, you don't have a job now, so maybe you will have to go without a phone for a while longer. I mean, I'm trying to make sure that you understand the impact here because this isn't made up. This is actually real people who get dragged into these kinds of systems. And it's all because of something that the bright data people, they know what's going on, but they choose to ignore it. Why? Why are they ignoring it? It's the same answer over and over again. It's not like I'm asking for something new. There's no deep revelation here, right?
Maybe it's because they actually won't face any punishment from this case.
They won't face any punishment from this case. Absolutely. They're not responsible for what goes over the network from their customers. They're just simply a common carrier. So they have no liability. So why don't they care? What is their motivation for doing this? Right, exactly. Not some money, astonishingly large numbers of money. Big bucks. You know, that's nice home on Marine Drive in West Vancouver with a yard kind of money. Or maybe you live next to, what's his name? The Lululemon guy there in Point Grey. Same kind of money. So 92% didn't result in a completed court case. That means 8% either completed successfully, and I can tell you that number was way less than that, or it was still pending. These kinds of cases can take years before they are dismissed. It is not like the police will immediately take your devices down and rush them through the forensic process to get them analyzed. It might take 6 months before the backlogged group that does this actually looks through the devices and says, oh, there's no CSAM on here. Now, when that happens, it will be up to the prosecutor to decide if they want to dismiss the charge, not the police. You've already been arrested. They already had probable cause. They are no longer involved in anything other than as an investigatory body, and the experts are handling it at that stage. The system does have a massive attrition rate. It's quite surprising how many of these cases that do start with some sort of legal action end up with that action being dismissed. Most of the people who are actually charged end up having sealed records, but it leaves a permanent scar because they never get that time back. If you get your phone back 3 years from now, what are you going to do? It's pretty much worthless. You're probably going to use it for like music or give it to, your younger sibling or something because you kind of don't want it anymore. You've probably moved on with your life. Odds are you've actually relocated. It's very hard to get statistics out of this. Mostly it's anecdotal, but in fact, that's the most common thing for people to do is to pack up and move to some place where nobody knows them. That report is actually current. It only goes through 2022, but it was published, I think, at the beginning of this year, early this year. StatsCan is great, has a lot of really good numerical data. And I'm hoping that some of you, when you were doing your batch API thinking, that you looked at something like StatsCan and said, how would I process this kind of data? Now, StatsCan is doing condensed data. They're doing the kinds of pipelines that we're talking about in Project 2 in order to produce these sorts of reports. Because they actually have living, moving data. They can actually keep track of things and watch them. The finance people do that. I would say of all the fields, finance is the one that gets watched most frequently because it tends to be watched on a daily basis, sometimes even more frequently than that, hourly. "47% of the cases do not result in a completed court charge or a completed court case, right? So you're formally accused, the case sits in limbo because nobody else cares. I mean, have you ever actually talked to someone who's involved in the criminal justice system? They're overloaded, they're overworked, they're constantly being pulled in many different directions. In one case, they don't care about that. It might affect you, but it doesn't affect them. So Claude just has to deal with legal fees, the professional damage that occurred, and the psychological stress. You know, what do you do when you're looking around for a new job? Do you tell people, well, why did you leave your old job? Well, I decided I wanted to live in a different location. Life changes. So the point here is that it can take a long time, and I think I've made that point pretty well. I don't want to spend too much time on it. It was great when I was putting these together, but I think I've made the point here. So let's look at the other cases that we've already talked about. We talked about Flow Health. Again, same kind of thing. I did further research actually on it, and indeed I confirmed that in the trial that ended in August, Flow Health explicitly said it was the responsibility of the software developers to have made sure that they honored that confidentiality clause. How many of you actually have done internships? In your internship, did they ever tell you that you were responsible for ensuring that the company's privacy standards were met in the software you developed? I saw a no here. Anybody say yes? Anybody at all? Sort of? Did they give it lip service? The performative thing? Or was it genuine?
It was genuine.
Okay, that's good. I mean, I'm not saying that no one does this, but it's kind of rare. Who was it?
Well, it's a med tech company. So
Okay.
IP is very much the value of the company.
Good. Good. But that's also because they're covered by specific legislation that dictates that. So they have a regulatory requirement there, and that actually helps. I should have looked it up. Actually, I may not have Slack on this. The department here at UBC, where they leaked a bunch of PII from, I think it was from Canvas actually, but it was one of the departments, and instead of reporting it, they tried to hide it. They tried to cover it up. UBC has a department that handles PII exposures. Have any of you ever had personally identifiable information exposed publicly? Right. Not much you can do about it. They just tell you, well, sorry, it leaked. We're doing our best. In the United States, there was a case by a company called Equifax, which is a credit reporting service that basically compromised something like 300 million people. The final settlement amount I received was $7.81. That's the value of your personally identifiable information to a company. That's what they call a cost of doing business. And the reason that I'm kind of probably spending a little too much time on this is that I just want you to try and frame it that way. The control clause, the clause clause control test paradigm is here precisely because it gives you an actionable way of taking responsibility for this. And if you are in a job situation where people are asking you to touch PII, you can say, what are we doing to protect it? And if they say, don't worry about it, get it in writing or send an email to confirm it, because you want that email printed and someplace safe that you'll have it when they come looking for you. I mean, how many of you have actually had jobs before? How many of you think the company was looking out for your best interests? No hands went up. Interesting. I wonder why. There's kind of a saying that says that human resources isn't actually there to protect you. It's there to protect the company. And this is part of that whole equation. But I'm also trying to make sure you understand that the company does this all over the place. It's not just to their employees. It's to their customers as well. It's to their suppliers. It's to everyone. the company tries to maximize profits and minimize risks, costs. Blah, blah, blah. So, I think this is actually a good question to ask, though, at this point. So, the company gains money, and I think that number is wildly low. But Claude had these very high costs associated with that. Is there an ethical trade-off here? For whom? If you cause a lot of harm to someone else, is it truly ethical? I'm not talking about legal now. I'm talking about ethical or moral. Is it ethical to do something that causes someone else significant harm? And I'm not telling you there's a right answer to this, because I think that that is a continuum. You know, at what point does it make you uncomfortable? And I wanted this conversation to make you uncomfortable because you're jaded. You've spent 4 years listening to people tell you endlessly about technology and how to program things and a way to solve these things, but they don't really talk about how every aspect of our life is impacted by the decisions that we make, by the things that they've taught you how to implement. I'm going to actually do an impromptu studio here. I'm going to ask you to do 5 minutes, talk to the people around you, and find out what they would do, and what you can share what you would do in this situation. Where is that line of ethics that you would draw? And I want you to listen to other people's perspectives, and when it's your turn to tell them your perspective, where's that line? Maybe you're one of those people who say, hey, as long as it's legal, it's fair game, because this is a law-based system. And as long as it's within the law, it should be allowed. Or maybe some of you are going to say, but wait a minute. You know, the law is kind of this arbitrary thing that serves the interests of a certain subset of people who actually can afford the lawyers. So maybe this isn't the right model. And I want you to think about this from different angles. And we'll just do this as a 5-minute exercise, and then we'll get back here, and we will actually talk about where people are. And, you know, I'll just sample like I've done before. We'll touch bases with a couple of people. So let's do that. 5 minutes. All good. You look tired. Me too. I was awake at 2:30 in the morning and didn't get back to sleep, so.
Oh no.
Yeah, it happens.
I would be dead if I was that little sleep.
Yeah, I don't do well with less than about 5 hours, but, you know,
Sometimes that happens.
sometimes it does. Hopefully it's nothing serious. You were just up late, like gaming or something.
Just couldn't fall asleep. It's nothing more than that.
Insomnia. Yeah, it happens sometimes. For me, it's usually if I wake up and then I do anything other than just like, you know, go to the washroom or something, and it's like then I start thinking. And once the brain,
Your mind gets going.
once the brain turns on, it's you just can't turn it off, for sure. Does this feel believable?
Yeah, it feels believable. I think cases like this are definitely more common than
It's a lot more common.
people
That's the
are
problem.
aware of.
I mean, I realize this is an extreme example, but there's a whole spectrum here.
Oh, of course, right? It's all the stuff in between, and I think like obviously this is like pretty like in your face and big.
And then you look at the numbers and you go, wow, okay, this is still affecting hundreds of people.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, damn. Yeah.
So yeah, I I think at least from an ethical perspective,
Yeah.
the answer, in my opinion, isn't the law. Because, I mean, this is my personal perspective. I think the law serves essentially people that get to control it, i.e. the rich people that can afford lawyers, like you were saying. So in that case, the law benefits the people that are benefiting from this, right? Like the people making the money. Whereas, I think the ethical answer is somewhere in between. Because obviously you don't want to forbid people from doing anything, because, I don't know, if the trade-off is like, oh, the company makes $10 billion per user, and the loss to the person is like, I don't know, they lose like $2
Exactly.
worth of value, right? That's not a bad thing.
And that's why there's no single answer here.
Yeah.
That's why I'm not saying this is the right answer, because I'm giving you deliberately ambiguous situations
Yeah.
because that's the real world we live in, and everyone wants a cut and dried answer.
Yeah.
I hear it even from the questions I get about the projects. It's like, do you want this, do you want that? It's like, well, I made them deliberately ambiguous for a reason, because this is the kind of crap you actually get in the real world.
Oh, exactly. It's never that easy.
Never. It's not paint by numbers, ever, in the real world. It's always all these complex trade-offs and interests. And I think your comment about the legal system is one that a lot of people miss, that we have this system of laws, but the system of laws protects the people who can afford the lawyers. I mean, all the friends of Jeffrey Epstein seem to just be fine.
Yeah, exactly, right?
But, some 25-year-old guy who gets arrested for CSAM from his, computer, he's basically screwed because he can't afford.
Exactly. You
That
need to have
kind
the
of
money to dodge the law.
Yeah. I mean, there's a whole interesting area in forensics, computer forensics about this exact issue and how much more complicated it is. And the courts actually do realize that this happens, but that means you're in court. And the fact that a lot of the cost I'm talking about here is what happens before that somebody steps up and says, this is wrong. We can't prosecute this.
Well, that one is too late.
Exactly, the harm is already done.
Yeah.
You can't. It's the you closing the barn door after the horse has run away.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. So, I find these in-class studios sort of interesting. This is the first time I've tried them. Just getting people to talk, because otherwise you sit here for 90 minutes, 75 minutes, and fall asleep. Especially since it's warm in here. She had the door propped open earlier because it was so warm.
It's really hot.
Yeah, I know. It's like, there we go, 5 minutes. All right, so who's willing to tell me what someone else told you that you thought was really insightful and an interesting perspective you hadn't considered before? See, you're not telling me what you thought. You're telling me what somebody else thought. Isn't that tricky of me? Sell out your neighbor. We'll give you $10 for everyone you refer to our business. How many of you actually, give your friend's identity information to one of those? We'll give you something for every name you give us. Nobody. And yet they keep doing it, so somebody's giving it to them. All right, come on. All right, there we go.
Sure. The psychological harm and the digital record is not really quantifiable with money. So we thought that the person is kind of losing more because they're losing more than just money, even though they are losing money.
In our society, in law in particular, the only thing that is really ultimately considered is in fact money. But what are they stealing from him that he will never get back? Reputation. How about his time? We're not talking about something that's going to be over and done in a few days. How much time do you actually have to live your life? I mean, I think the average life expectancy in Canada is around the early 80s, right? So you're in the early 20s. So you got about another 60 years to go, on average. Some of you will live to be into your 90s, maybe even into your early hundreds. Healthcare is going to get better. Maybe you'll live to 120. Some of you will actually go out and, try to get on the 99 and actually get hit by it, and you'll be bringing that number down. And she's laughing. It's like, have you never heard the expression getting hit by a bus? And it made you laugh. That's the funniest part. Good. Good. Anything else? Come on. I mean, I think there was a really good point that I heard over there that I'm going to share if you guys don't. But I don't want to keep talking. I want to hear you. We'll get to one of the back benchers here. What did you hear that surprised you or that made you think about it differently?
Kind of just start kind of saying Claude's his entire worth is like the $3.
$3. His entire worth is like $3. Right. I kind of made that point earlier too, and I said, great, my PII leaking out with Equifax in the United States was worth $7.81. And that's kind of harsh when you think about it. I think it's a really good point. Right. Somebody else doesn't really value your privacy very much, do they? You're just a cash cow. How about one of you guys? See, I'm hitting the backbenchers because they are hiding back here because they thought that they wouldn't actually get attention. Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, if it's maybe informed consent from the guy from Claude, but then at the same time he was given a chance. He just kind of ignored the TOS. So
Okay.
I was saying then maybe like TOS for the people who are using the bandwidth they kind of take from Claude, but then if they're gonna distribute that material, they're probably not really concerned with a TOS. So it's kind of.
So that's an interesting perspective. Maybe we should have restricted the usage we'll allow on the other end. Now let's take it from the Bright Data perspective. Let's suppose that their contract with the people who engage their services, who hire them for their residential proxy services, they put those terms and conditions in there. What is Claude going to do now? He's going to go and sue them. Maybe. Someone will. They'll put a class action together, or they'll do something like that. They'll find some way of suing them by saying, we don't know what they do. We have no responsibility for that. We are just a common carrier. They disclaim the responsibility for how their product gets used. And now I've broadened this out. I mean, I took a very specific example to make you feel uncomfortable, but I wanted you to step back and to say, this is just an extreme example. There's a lot in the continuum between this example and all of the things that I will build in my career. And they will affect real people. And if you don't think about it, who will? Because you are all people who are in probably mostly computer science, maybe some ECE people, maybe somebody's in the data science program. You're all technologists. You're not lawyers. You're not philosophers. You're technologists. And mostly what you've been trained in is how to build technology. But in order to do that in a way that is ethical and professional, you do need to think about the folks that are affected by this, because I will tell you the money people are not really concerned about that. The money people hire lawyers to write terms of service that say, we are not responsible for anything that goes wrong. The Whole in Networks contract said the maximum liability they had was $50. Has anybody ever heard of a company called Disney? There's a relatively recent case, I think it was last year, a relatively recent case in which a man went to Disney World in Florida and suffered anaphylactic shock when eating at a restaurant at Disney after he had told them that he had an allergy, and the lawyers for Disney presented as an argument in court that because he had had a trial subscription to Disney Plus that said that he couldn't sue them, that his wrongful death suit must be disallowed by the court. And that leads me to something that I heard, which was the legal system is constructed by people who have money for lawyers to make sure that they keep that money. And honestly, that's the harsh reality. I think I mentioned, and I just went back through this again because it affects some of the things that I do. Intellectual property rights at the present time do not apply to anything created by AI. So if you use Veo or ChatGPT or whatever, what is it, the banana one from Google, if you use any of these tools to produce a video, to produce a picture, to produce a work of any sort, it's not eligible for copyright. And I started thinking about that, and I said, okay, Adobe is selling mostly stock photos that are now created by AI. In fact, it wouldn't surprise me if when you go searching for something on Adobe stock, if they don't take your search term and feed it into an LLM and generate some artwork for you to browse. But there's no copyright attached to that. They don't actually own anything. Anyone can use it. And it made me wonder, so that's the system right now. How long before the laws are changed so that someone will own that? I read these articles about how they're using AI to create new medicines, and they're patenting those medicines. And I'm like, patent law is actually pretty uniform around the world, and one of the things it requires is a human inventor. I need to write a blog post about this because I actually think there's a really interesting observation here, which is knowing that this is the case, companies need to clearly document the involvement of AI in the development of anything they create, because if they don't, it is reasonable for a court to presume that the purpose of not documenting it clearly is that it was majority created by AI. Because they already know that AI creations are not eligible for these kinds of intellectual property rights. And that's what led me to the realization that, yeah, but we're talking about Disney. We're talking about Adobe. We're talking about Google. We're talking about Amazon and Microsoft. And TikTok. Who owns TikTok? ByteDance. These are big companies. They have a lot of money. They have great lawyers. I mean, Disney had lawyers that were so incredibly good that when the governor of Florida came a-calling to try and get, to punish them there in Florida, they found out that Disney had entered into long-term agreements with the local planning commission that Disney had basically controlled for the last 70 years. And they were written so that they were finite length, and it's very important because it's a very fine detail of the legal process that you cannot write contracts that do not have a termination point. They're called perpetuities, and they're very limited allowance. So in fact, they wrote the contract so that it would expire upon the death of the youngest heir to the British monarchy. This is in the US. And you're like, what? Their lawyers are really good. I actually read an analysis that said that that was brilliantly written, that it was done by someone who really had a very deep understanding of the law. Why does Disney have that kind of deep understanding of the law? Because they got a lot of money. Anybody ever heard of a character called Mickey Mouse? When Walt Disney was first created in the 1940s, copyright was like 25 or 30 years. By the time the very first copyright on Steamboat Willie, which is the first one with Mickey Mouse in it from the early 1920s, expired, it was 100 years later. And do you know why the dates kept getting extended? Because Walt Disney had a lot of money. A lot of money. And they just kept convincing the US authorities to keep extending the lifespan of copyright. So that's my point. I don't want to belabor, well, I've already belabored it, so I don't want to belabor it more. Oh, I moved the mouse, right? So of course, come on. So how do you actually operationalize this? Before you design a system, who's not here? That's why I put this chair up here. I wanted this to be a very visible sign. You have to look at it because it's basically in your face the whole time, and you're sitting here saying, okay, I've not really thought about things that way before. How many of you had ever even heard of the concept of the empty chair before this? It's not something I made up. It's actually a known ethical tool for considering the perspectives of people who aren't present. But nobody bothered to give that information to you because you're technology people, and technology people don't have to worry about ethics, right? I would argue the opposite. I would argue no one else is, so if we don't, who will? Because I like to think that technology people care about truth. Now, I'm not telling you what is ethical. I'm trying to be very careful about that. I'm trying to give you the information you need to see ethical situations, but I leave it to you to figure out what the right balance is. So what is the worst case scenario for our most vulnerable user? Claude Wang was our most vulnerable user in that particular scenario. Well, not quite. There actually is one more vulnerable user that we didn't even talk about. Who is it? Because this is the other side of that balance. You don't know. What does CSAM stand for? Yeah, and you're sitting there going, oh, right, yeah. That's the other victim here. Because there are some Claudes who actually did distribute this material. And it's not the material itself. It's the fact that they had to abuse someone. Somebody had to abuse someone to make that material. And I wish I could say that this doesn't happen, but I've told you already, and I will tell you again. Any online streaming platform has people that explicitly look for this kind of objectionable material. Ever heard of the term snuff film? I see one head bobbing. If you don't know what it is, look it up. But be prepared, because it's not pleasant. And yet, it does exist. I like number 3. How would I design this differently if it was one of my family members that was sitting in the empty chair? My mother, my sister, my brother, my cousin. That helps make it personal. If you had worked for Flow Health and you had thought, that's my sister, would you have done anything differently? At least you would have considered what the impact of not protecting that data was. At least if you'd been sitting there in the room saying, we're going to send this data to Facebook with all sorts of PII attached to it, you might have said, wait a minute. I forgot to turn the power on again. There we go. There's always one thing I forget. At least that's the one thing, because it's easy to fix. And then there's that last one, and I find this one interesting. It's the law of unintended consequences, which is, what do we do when people use our system in a way that we hadn't even actually envisioned? I mean, I don't think the Holo Networks people set out to build a proxy service that could be used for CSAM distribution. So put on your black hat and say, how could somebody abuse the work I'm doing? A lot of times you're going to find out that it doesn't apply at all, and that's fine. Then at least you've gone through the process of thinking about it. I think somebody actually asked me about that at one point. They said, well, what if I don't have any PII? And I said, that's great, but how are you going to put a test into your system to make sure that you never have PII? Because if you don't put that test in and the PII gets introduced, no one will notice because you didn't put a test in. But if you put a test in, you can protect yourself. So there you go, a pledge. A way of thinking about this, a way of framing it in your own mind. Maybe you don't care, that's fine too. So, I just want to do a little bit of discussion here. So we'll do one last 5-minute studio, and that is talk to people. Who's responsible for this? In the United States, there is and was an application called IceBlock. I don't know if you've ever heard anything about the United States, but currently there are actively seeking to remove people from the United States that they consider to be undesirables. Many of whom do not have proper documentation because they overstayed visas, they crossed the border without them. This might sound kind of shocking, but it wasn't that long ago that you could cross the US-Canadian border with nothing. You didn't need anything. If you wanted to move between the countries, you literally just packed up and moved. That ended sometime around World War II. Passports are actually not that old. They were introduced, I think, in the 20th century as well. Before that, migration was much easier. Now it's become much more difficult. IceBlock was an application that was used in order to track the activities of the immigration enforcement people in the United States, and it was distributed on the Google and Apple store. It has been removed because the US government objected to it. But it wasn't removed by the US government, it was removed by Google and Apple. Should governments be able to pressure companies to remove applications that practice a right of the people that the government doesn't agree with? Because you have the right to keep track of law enforcement and where they're located. Having nothing to do with your status in the country. I mean, that's a separate right. If you are a Canadian citizen, permanent resident, or you are here with lawful authority, those rights apply to you. I mean, if you were here on a temporary status permit of some sort, then I wouldn't recommend getting into much trouble because, of course, they can revoke that. Permanent residents can lose that if they are arrested and charged with a crime. Well, they have to be convicted of a crime that involves a penalty of more than 6 months. Canadian citizens currently cannot be removed from Canada. Under one of the governments fairly recently, there were narrow circumstances where they could strip someone of Canadian citizenship if they had another citizenship. And that's because Canada is a signatory to the UN Convention on Stateless People. The United States is not a signatory to the UN Convention on Stateless People. So, let's talk about it. Do it for 3 minutes, not 5 minutes, because it's almost the end of class. And then we'll do a quick wrap up and then move on. So 3 minutes starting now. Everybody reads the slide. I mean, there's only, 4 questions there. Pick one. Everybody's going to pick the first one, so some of you pick the last one. All right, I'm going to stop the recording here.